Recording mode. We are recording. All right, well, my son Chris has asked for a documentary on how to make my family famous, not world famous, biscuits. So this is it. We have a few different things that we're going to need. We like to use white lily self-rising flour. We use Crisco butter flavored shortening sticks and water. Then we'll also be making a sausage gravy as we go along. I'm going to move over to the oven and turn the oven on because we have to preheat the oven while we make the biscuits. So we're preheating the oven to 450 degrees. Start. And now we're going to begin to move back to the bowl and make the biscuits. The first element is the white flour. I'm going to be making a full batch of biscuits this morning. You can judge the math if you need to make more or less. I'll be using 8 cups of white lily self-rising flour. I'll be using 2 sticks or 2 cups of the Crisco butter flavored shortening sticks. Okay, so those just get opened and dumped into the flour. Okay, yes, that is Mom's voice you're hearing over on the side because she comes in and she starts talking. Mom's always talking. We have company. We've got Bradley on camera. We've got Stacy visiting, and she's off camera. Always to be so, because she doesn't like to be on camera, but that's okay. All right, so now what I've got is I've got 8 cups of flour and 2 cups of shortening, and those need to be cut into the flour. For that, I just use 2 regular kitchen knives, and it's a matter of cutting the shortening into smaller and smaller chunks, each of which becomes automatically coated by the flour. So this process allows all of the shortening to be mixed into the biscuit dough before it bakes, and then it melts, obviously, while it's baking, and it really adds a lot to the flavor. So it takes about 3 or 4 minutes. All I'm doing is taking the 2 knives and moving them back and forth this way across the shortening to make all of the shortening cubes small. I define small as being about the size of the tip of your little finger, maybe a couple a little larger or smaller, but you want to make sure that they're not huge chunks because otherwise it ends up being a greasy biscuit that doesn't rise big enough. Okay, so I'm going to come up now. Vanna White, ladies and gentlemen. So this is what the biscuit dough should look like before you add the water. You can see there are small chunks of biscuit shortening here. They're all about the size of the tip of my thumb. Okay. Now, you want to add warm water. And you want to add enough so that the dough will be mixed, but you don't want it too wet. So it's easier to add water, mix the dough, and if it's not wet enough, add a little more water. Right now, I know that Mom is really frustrated with me because I didn't say we're putting in 8 cups of water or 6 cups of water. We're just putting in some water, but what can I say? That's how I run. So I'm getting the water warm. And now, as the water comes into the dough, I'll be mixing it with this wooden spoon. I don't think that a wooden spoon is a key element here. Just happens to be what I'm using. I wouldn't suggest chopsticks, but if all you've got is a metal spoon, I don't think it's a problem. So we're mixing the dough. Now here's one of the secrets to getting good rise on the biscuits. And from this point forward, the least amount you can work the dough, the better the biscuit will be. Now you're going to have to work it to mix it. You're gonna have to work it to make sure it's all, put in together, but you want to work the dough as little as possible. Okay, I'm gonna show you this dough right now. This actually, you can see there's a lot of flour around, and I'm still mixing in. But I can see from this consistency that once I mix this a little bit more, the dough is all going to be wet. So that's about what I want. You don't want this soupy. So at this point, I'm going to be done with my spoon, and I'm going to just go to my hand, and I'm going to use the bowl to mix in all of the flour into the dough. Okay, and again, I don't want to overmix it. When you finish, this is what you should have. You'll have a ball of dough that has a little bit of flour on the outside. At that point, you're going to reach into the flour bag, you'll flour your work surface, and the dough will come out onto the work surface.
Now I have a question.
Yes.
If you add a little bit too much water, can you throw in a little bit of flour?
Yes, that's a great point. Again, you want to mix the dough as little as possible, but if you put in too much water, add flour, or if you have too little dough, then you can, too little flour, you can add water. Okay, I'm flouring the surface so I can work it, and I'm making it to about a ½ inch, the size of your thumb thick. Hello, Miss Tiffany. My favorite Florida daughter-in-law has just arrived. My other daughter-in-law is in Washington. She's my favorite Washington daughter-in-law. Okay, so here I have the dough. It's relatively uniform thickness. Again, about the width of your tip of your thumb, about ½ inch. Ungreased, unbaked cookie sheet. And something that can be used to cut out something about this size. This is going to be my biscuits. So using my floured hand to move the biscuits, I simply cut the biscuit out and put it on the pan. I like to have the edges touching because it lets the biscuits rise better, I've found. Maybe there's really nothing to that. It's just my experience, no scientific testing. So just using the glass to cut out the biscuits. Okay, now when you get here, you need to put it back together again. So you bring the dough together, you recompress it, so you're now back down to your uniform size. Again, touching it as little as possible. Maybe a little bit of flour on the top, keeps the glass from sticking. Little twisting motion. And if you don't get the entire biscuit into the glass, that's not a big deal. Not even a little deal. There we go. Those biscuits are now ready to get put into the oven. And I'm going to put them in now. I don't do anything to them. I don't put butter on the top. I don't add any other seasoning. It's just those biscuits. And if all works well, they will rise and brown. So I'll go put those in the oven. Up near the top of the baking area. And convection on. And now back here. While the biscuits cook, we're going to make the sausage gravy. Okay, does it say recording? Great. Okay, so now we're back and we're getting to the gravy portion. The first part of the gravy is Jimmy Dean maple sausage. Since I'm making a full batch, I'm going to use 2 of the 1-pound tubes, which we will begin to cook up the sausage. While the sausage is cooking, I'm going to put some water in there so that as it's cooking, it will mix with the sausage and will begin forming the base of the gravy, which will be very flavorful. Just flattening it down so it gets to the bottom of the pan. The reason I call this maple sage gravy is because I use maple sausage and add in sage as a seasoning. So I'm going to add in, and this is seasoned to taste. So if you get to the end of making the gravy and you taste it and you want a little bit more sage flavor, you've got some more. I also like to put in a little bit of salt because otherwise the gravy tastes bland. I'm going to let that cook and brown up a little bit, and then we'll add some water in a few minutes. Okay, all right, so now we've got the sausage. I've added a little bit of water. It's come to a boil. Mixing the sausage to break it up. We don't want chunks. Well, there'll obviously be some chunks, but we want it basically broken up. Now that the sausage has started to cook and turn brown, I'm going to add in more water because what we really want is sausage gravy. So there we have that. When that comes back to a boil, that'll continue to cook the sausage. The other part of the gravy mix is the flour base for thickening. One thing that a lot of people have difficulty with when they're making a gravy with a flour base is not having lumps in the gravy. I'm going to tell you my secret for a lumpless gravy. There's the flour base. I do happen to be continuing to use the self-rising flour. Doesn't need to be that way. You can use any flour at all. To have a lumpless gravy, you have to start out with flour that doesn't have any lumps. This does. This whisk will break them all up, and I will end up with a completely lumpless flour base. The key to keeping it that way is the rapid introduction of cold water and then rapidly shaking to mix it so the emulsion doesn't have a chance to develop any lumps. So now that I've got all the lumps broken up there, I'll leave this. We'll put the water in just as the last step, just before we introduce it to the gravy. I know I'm off camera, but all I'm doing is rinsing off the whisk. You don't need to see how that's done. We'll take a quick peek at our biscuits just to see how they're coming along. And they've risen nicely. They're coming along. I'm going to turn the convector off at this point because the tops have browned. And they should be ready in the next 4 to 5 minutes. Okay, well, our gravy has come to a boil, or the gravy base, which is what I want. I'm going to leave it boiling, and I'm about to put the water into the flour and mix it up. Now, look, in order to do this right, you have to know my secret ingredient. Nobody has ever seen me put this stuff in before. It really is a secret. But if you're going to come out with the same flavor, you need to know. So, although this has been done with nobody in the kitchen every other time, you must have orange peel, nutmeg, and unsulfurized black molasses. Okay? Now these don't really get used. I'm just messing with your head. Okay, here I go. I'm adding water, cold water, to the flour mixture that has been shaken. And now I'm doing a quick shake because I don't want to let any of the modules form into things that could make like globs. Makes a lovely mess. Makes a lovely mess, but that's okay because my wife has a laundry machine. Now, if she ever saw me do this, she'd scream at me, but she won't see, so it doesn't matter. Right, honey? Okay, so here I go. I'm now adding the flour mixture into the gravy, stirring. I'm keeping it boiling. I want to let it thicken. No lumps, yay. Okay, so the flour and water mixture I made, I added a little bit too much water. So I'm going to make it thicker with the addition of more flour and less water. Here we go. Oh, and this isn't shaking. So now I'm going to have to mix because I grabbed the wrong cover. So I will mix instead of shake. Not as easy, but still effective. And if I work at it well, I can still make a mess on the counter. Takes a little bit of extra effort. There we go. Pull this back over, turn this back up on high. And I'm pretty sure our biscuits are ready to come out of the oven at this point. Yes, they are. Here we go, a lovely rack of biscuits. I'm just going to go put this on the table. Now we've come back to a boil. I will continue to add a little bit more of our gravy thickening mixture. One of the things I've always thought about is maybe getting a little liquid smoke or something like that to brown up the color of the sauce, because I like a browner gravy. Doesn't affect the flavor, that it's not as brown as I'd like, but there we go. Now we've got a nice thick gravy. And you can kind of see that it's thin enough to soak into a biscuit, but it's thick enough that it's not just going to run all over the plate, hopefully. So, all right. Now the only other thing to do is put the gravy on the biscuits and enjoy. Okay, who should get the first biscuit?
Grandma!
Okay, well, Grandma it is. We've got the biscuit.
Right.
You want gravy put right on top now?
Yes, please.
Okay, here comes the gravy. And we are ready to roll.
Remember, we're gonna like be
Bon
all
appetit.
when we eat again, so eat